You're tuning into the Active Mom Podcast with physical therapist, Dr. Carrie Pagliano, a real mom's guide to all things postpartum return to workouts after baby. If you're a postpartum mom, coach, trainer, or physical therapist looking for answers on how to get back to running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, you name it, without the fear of pelvic floor issues or doing something wrong, this is the podcast for you. Let's start the show. All right. I'm super excited because I think we've been planning this podcast for, I don't know, longer than 6 or 8 months. I'm super excited to have physiotherapist Munira Hudani on the podcast. She is well known for Diastasis Recti, just knowledge and education, and also moving on into information about tummy tuck and that sort of stuff as well. And she's a new mom, which we're so excited to hear a little bit about that. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I'm just so glad we finally were able to make this work. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Why don't you tell everybody just the quick down low, who you are, where you're from, kind of that sort of thing.
Okay, quickly, I am a pelvic health physio. I am located in Alberta, and I do practice primarily in prenatal and postnatal care. My passion is in diastasis, and it is part of my mission to help distill the information, the research, everything that we have available academically, distill it down, make it easy to understand for the everyday person as well as professionals, so that we can eliminate the fear that is associated with diastasis.
Yes, absolutely. And you have been a physio for how long now?
Since 2009, so 14-ish.
A bit. Now, did you have any sense in 2009 that diastasis would take on this like life of its own that really it has probably since that you joined the profession?
Not a clue. Not a clue. It wasn't even on my radar anyways, because when I first started, I wasn't in pelvic health. I was doing orthopedics, also a bit of geriatric rehab as well. And then I transitioned into pelvic health through an interview with one of the people that I was trying to apply to have a job with. And they were just wondering if I would be interested in setting up either a pelvic health program or vestibular. And because I knew nothing of pelvic health, I actually said yes to the vestibular and kind of shut down the pelvic health because I just barely knew what it was. And whatever I did know about it, I did not want to go down that route. But regardless, I was open to at least going to a place to shadow someone and learn from them. And then I could decide properly if I would do this or not. I'm so glad I did.
We are
Shout out Carolyn Van Deeken.
Oh, Carolyn's wonderful. She's just wonderful.
Absolutely stellar. Yeah. So she was gracious enough to let me come see her like once a week for 6 weeks. And I went to her clinic. It was busy every single day that I was there. There were people in the waiting room. She had staff, support staff. And I'm like, wow, there are so many people that need pelvic health. Yeah. And so for me, I knew just from a helping the community standpoint, this is a good thing to try to set up. And also from a business standpoint, this is great as well. So I did it and I never looked back.
I think a lot of us who got into pelvic health early in our careers and before we had kids or pelvic floor issues, like there's that like one person that kind of like changes your mind. You're like, I don't think I want to do this. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, there's some stuff here for sure. So yay for Carolyn. We appreciate that she brought you to the dark side.
She did. And then Carolyn and Nellie were also, Nellie Fagani, they were setting up Pelvic Health Solutions, which was the educational platform for people to learn, go to in-person courses. And I think there was a few cohorts of people, small groups of people that had taken some courses before I had, but I was like in the first few of the cohorts that got started. And it was awesome.
It's been cool to see how the evolution and if you think back to like when, you're first learning about this stuff, do you remember the first time kind of what you learned about what diastasis was and the rehab? Because whenever I think about that, it really kind of makes me laugh. Like, wow. I think one of the things I was taught was if you take a TheraBand and wrap it around your belly, and pull the sides together, they'll learn to work that way. And I was like, no, that doesn't happen.
Oh, no, but we believe it, and that's the thing with education is whatever we are taught, we tend to just
Yeah.
believe it. We take it for, for what it is, and we just run with it.
Yeah. Do you
So
remember
yes,
what you were kind of first taught
yeah,
or what? Yeah.
it was
Go into that a
exactly
little bit.
that. So
Yeah.
it was around, I think it was in the pregnancy and pelvic girdle course, again, many, 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 many years ago. And there was a small section on diastasis. And I do remember the handout that was provided. It showed exactly that, the splinted crunch,
Mhm.
without a TheraBand, but like a scarf kind of
Yep.
thing. And you wrap it around and do a head lift. And that was essentially the treatment
Right.
available for diastasis. Yeah. So that was my first exposure. And that
What
was
was
not enough,
No.
because more
I was
people,
like,
continue to come in and seek help for it. And the more people you continue to do that with, and you realize it's not working, you try to seek for more help and more answers. And
yes.
so I did take some additional courses, which there were very few.
Mhm.
And then so one of the courses I took, I ended up a couple of years later ended up teaching that same course. And since then, it's also evolved just through our whole understanding of diastasis. So it has been a process,
Yeah.
and it continues to evolve. I feel like there's been a lot of shifting happening within the past, maybe even 3 years,
Mhm.
potentially a lot within this year and like last year in terms of research. But yeah, a lot has kind of completely been turned on its head, and that's happening recently. So we just have to
Yeah.
keep up with it and try
Yeah.
to help people who are already confused.
So let's
Yeah.
start with that because I feel like the biggest question I joke that here in the DC area, 98% of moms think that they have diastasis recti and most of them don't. So let's just start with like what actually is diastasis recti?
So diastasis, as we classically or traditionally define it, is the widening of the linea alba, and that, when we're referring to it, is something that happens during pregnancy. So we tend to call that pregnancy related diastasis, but diastasis can also happen in other populations. So we're not necessarily going to dive into that, but in terms of pregnancy related diastasis, we are looking at a thinning and a widening of the midline connective tissue of the abdomen that runs vertically from the sternum down to the pubic bone. And this occurs just due to the prolonged pressure and stretching from a growing baby, and also due to the altered hormonal environment that allows for these changes to occur within the tissues. Um, and then it is an absolutely natural physiological response in pregnancy. The stat that tends to just get thrown out there all the time is 100% of women by their third trimester will present with diastasis or will have some degree of diastasis. And then what we know right now is in the postpartum time frame, typically 1/3 of people who are at the 12-month postpartum mark will have some lingering amount of widened linea alba. What does that mean? That is up for debate. What we think it means has been changing and has changed. So we used to think that the space itself in those who have the widened linea alba for after their first pregnancy, we used to think that that was the source and the root of dysfunction. And I say dysfunction with quotation marks. We used to think that that was the source and the root of back pain, of core instability. That is also, for people who are listening and not watching, those are also in quotation marks, but core instability, potentially pelvic floor conditions. And so we used to say that diastasis, the widened linea alba, is the cause of these things. And we have now a lot of research. I wouldn't say a lot, actually, I'll take that back. We do
More
have
than
research.
zero. More than
That's right.
zero.
That's a good place, a good place to start. We've got something there. We have more than zero amount of research to let us know that actually what we were thinking about it is not true. So it has now been sort of separated from conditions like low back pain, pelvic girdle pain, and pelvic floor issues like incontinence and prolapse.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm going to have you pause for 1 second. One of the first times that people come into the contact with that concept of diastasis is, I think they get pregnant and then they start Googling, right? And so here in the States, we're getting more and more women that are coming to physiotherapy preemptively because they want to do the quote right things, right?
Yeah.
So I have a lot of women that come in and that's their first question is, how do I prevent diastasis? Not how do I make sure that my pelvic floor is ready for birth? Like literally the first question is, I want to prevent diastasis. What would you say to that client?
Well, I get that too a lot. And I have a discussion with them right at the beginning where I say, well, what we can do for diastasis, what we know can potentially help in terms of the abdominal wall is keeping the abdominal wall as strong as we can in pregnancy so that it can support the weight of the growing baby as the baby gets bigger. Now, in terms of prevention, I do always tend to mention the stat of every person, 100%, will have some amount of stretching of the linea alba because there is a baby growing inside. And there is no way to prevent that unless you do not grow in size. And in pregnancy, that just doesn't happen. So we have stretching of the abdominal wall, and that stretching happens for a reason. The linea alba is part of that process, but we can't prevent the stretching of the linea alba in the same way that we can't prevent the stretching of the rest of the abdomen, the muscles on the side and the muscles in the front. We can't prevent that. That is a natural part of pregnancy. And so we allow these muscles and tissues to have the give. We don't want to restrict that.
Yep.
And so the goal right now is not actually prevention. It's to keep you strong. It's to keep your abdominal muscles strong, because what we know is postpartum, a lot of people tend to have significant weakness in these muscles. And that's actually what tends to let people feel weak, let people feel unstable, they feel disconnected. And so what we'll work on now are a bunch of strategies that you can use now and afterwards.
I love that. I mean, for any number of reasons. One is that you've given them education on the, hey, this is what's going on. This is normal. But I think you've also targeted really what the question is not this thing, diastasis. It's they don't want to feel weak. They don't want to feel disconnected in postpartum. And I think that's really the root of it. But the other question that comes up is, when people say, that stat that you said, 100% of people, this is what happens normally. I've had people in social, everything's really nice and everybody's congenial, that say that is fear mongering. When you're saying this is going to happen, this is not preventable. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand and appreciate the sentiment behind that. But I think it now becomes tricky when anything we say can be taken as a negative, or it can be spinned negatively. Even if it's a positive statement, you could take a look at the words and have such a nuanced discussion and be like, no, because you said that word, that is going to lead some people to feel like that you are creating fear amongst people with this. And so I think that is true, and anything we say can always be taken and spinned around, anything. So yes, I understand 100% of women will have it, but I hope that the idea that the 100% is there to have allow people to have a sense of reassurance that it's common. It's not even common.
What's
It's normal.
normal? This is
It's
that's
normal.
what yes, exactly. It's like the 100% is like we're telling you up front, this is not something you can prevent. Don't try to prevent it. It actually happens for a really good reason. So
And
telling you and empowering you this actually
we want to
should
take the
reduce the
weight off.
fear. Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
And that's yeah, I'm glad you said that because I again, it makes me want to bash my head against the wall where I'm like, no, this is to not let people think that they can control something that they can't. I joke that that's like parenting 101. Like the second you conceive, you've started to lose control, like in a
One
lot of
word at a
ways.
time.
This is just the beginning. Many,
Yeah,
many
that
things.
bucket of control just gets emptied more and more.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So
But you know what that also points out is how much fear there currently is
yes.
around having a wide and linear alba. So
Mhm.
everything we have attributed to this particular structure,
Yep.
that is very telling. That thought that if you're saying everybody has it and that's fear mongering, actually that also just goes to show where we are kind of collectively, where some people
Yeah.
are really believing in the idea that this is a cause of so many problems. This is
Mhm.
going to be an issue of not even that we were talking about low back pain, pelvic floor issues, pelvic girdle pain, but also what they're probably more concerned about is the aesthetics, and
Yes.
that having that wide and linear alba is going to be the cause of me having a distended abdomen. Whereas if you take a look just through the anatomy of the postpartum abdominal wall, in generally in those who have more distension, um, you will see that it's not just the linea alba that's creating that
Right.
appearance. It is the lingering laxity and weakness of the abdominal muscles and the rest of the abdominal connective tissue. And then part of that can also, that appearance can also be attributed to the presence of intra-abdominal and extra-abdominal fatty tissue, loose skin. There could be a cesarean scar that's there that's creating some other areas of distortion, or not distortion, that's something else, but just like an area that doesn't quite seem smooth. And so there's a lot that we need to consider when it comes to the
Yeah.
appearance, and it's not just the linea alba,
Right.
but we have made it too simple, I find, in that saying it's because of the linea alba.
Yeah, no, I think so too. So are we any closer to kind of understanding and almost being able to predict who is more likely to have longer standing issues beyond that 12-month postpartum period? Like what are the factors that we currently know and what are some of the factors that maybe we're starting to suspect but need more research that might predispose somebody to potentially having some issues later on?
The the main thing that we know is that when you have, sorry, a subsequent pregnancy after your first, that becomes a risk factor.
Yep.
So having more than one child will be, or sorry, more than one pregnancy will be a risk factor. So it goes from 30% of individuals at the 12-month postpartum mark. It goes up to around 50 to 60%
Mm,
if you've had more than one pregnancy. And so that is a risk factor. What seems to be um, mentioned in research, but still somewhat conflicting, but some people are saying it is, and some people are saying it's not quite, is having a cesarean section
yeah.
in your previous pregnancy. And then that can be a risk factor for subsequent issues in subsequent pregnancies. So there's that. In terms of factors such as age, BMI, um, size of baby, these things have not actually been consistently shown in research. So we're not able to really confidently stand behind those things as risk factors. You would think, on one hand, well, if my baby is large, then my stomach and abdomen is going to stretch out much more. So that will predispose me to having more issues afterwards. But then you go and you think about people who have twin pregnancies, and some of those individuals actually have an abdominal wall that kind of returns back to its baseline position, more
Yeah.
or less. So it's not always because of the size of the baby or babies on the inside. There are genetic factors there as well. And then there's there's a change, or not a change, but there is a difference in the type of collagen that those that have diastasis have versus those that don't have diastasis. So there's less type 1 and 3, I believe. I have to double check that, but there's less of that particular kind of collagen that helps with sort of elasticating and creating that elastic resilience in the tissues. There's less of that in those that have diastasis. So there's a genetic factor.
Are
But
there other ways to know whether you have that collagen factor, other kind of predictors or things like that?
I know that I wish I could say that there absolutely is. I mean, I haven't gone down the potential rabbit hole of hypermobility, like
Yeah.
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. But if you have one of those disorders, then for sure
Yep.
there is a connective tissue element to that, and it potentially could lead to more abdominal issues postpartum, potentially.
Yeah. No, I mean, for myself, I 2 C-sections, 3 pregnancies, no separation after my first, and then our third pregnancy, second C-section, then I started to notice it afterwards. And so, I mean, that to me, it makes sense with, the data that you have. And, having gone through 2 abdominal surgeries where you're gutted like a fish, it stands to reason, that something
Yeah,
might happen.
yeah,
But yeah, no, I think that's a question that we get a lot, is like, all right, well, what might make me potentially likely to have that? And to your point, like, there's a lot of things that we still just don't know. So that
yeah.
brings the question that you mentioned earlier of, we've made some big gains in the last couple of years. So can you give us some highlights as to kind of what some of those gains are in the research?
Right, and they may be classified as gains, but some might say otherwise.
More information. How about that? Whether it's positive or negative, we'll leave it to somebody else to decide, but we have more information.
Yeah, well, the reason why I say that is because, what we do as rehab professionals is we are really great at offering exercise programs for individuals, and whether it's core strengthening, abdominal strengthening, or any other part of the body, we're really good at that. And we use that as conservative management for diastasis. So diastasis has kind of 2 branches of treatment options. There's a surgical option or conservative option. And when we're talking about conservative, we are kind of the first line of people or professionals to help. And that is because of our unique skill set and knowledge. Now, the research behind conservative management for diastasis in this year that was published, 2023, has actually been showing that our programs are not exactly effective in
Mm,
reducing the size of the width of the linea alba. Interrecti distance is not being decreased very much with our conservative management programs. So there were some systematic reviews with meta-analyses that were being done, but there were 2. One was done in 2021 or published in 2021, one in 2023, and they both kind of came to the same conclusion. So when we have studies that can pool other randomized control trials together, so we can kind of see the overall effect of what we're doing, it kind of gives it more weight in their conclusions, their results. And so when we have 2 of them kind of stating the same thing, that we really aren't making huge changes. We're talking about 0.44
yeah,
centimeters, 0.23 centimeters. Like, we're talking about really small numbers. And the researchers do question the clinical significance of these small amounts of change. So it's not that they're not saying nothing is changing. They're saying in
right.
terms of interrecti distance, there's a small amount of change, and is that even relevant or clinically
Yeah.
relevant?
So
So
my first question on that, knowing how far we've come in the types of exercise that we
yeah,
prescribe, is generally what were those exercises described that were, stereotypical rehab?
yes, exactly. So that I was sort of diving into that as well, because when you're seeing that an exercise program isn't leading to change, now what they're describing as change is different. They're saying,
Right.
okay, change is a reduction in the inter-recti distance. They're not talking about a change in strength or a change in function. They
Right.
were looking at this specific thing.
Yep.
And so the programs have not, from what I've seen, except for one, have not been done to a level of intensity that's required for that physiological adaptation to strengthening.
Yeah.
They haven't been done for long enough either, maybe 3 months or less, whereas we know that that's not usually when we see muscle hypertrophy or changes in the sort of morphology of the muscle. That
Yep.
happens sort of between 3 and 12 months. So they're being cut off too soon. And the exercises may not be varied enough. They may not be specific enough to the abdominal wall and may include more or less pelvic floor instead of abdominal muscle specific exercises. So yes, there are definitely issues there. Now, there was a study that Diane Lee was talking about in the Birth Healing Summit that occurred this year. And so she did her study with Paul Hodges, and she was sort of checking off some of these boxes. Let's have people who have pretty, at least moderate to severe diastasis, have them participate in an exercise program that is done for longer than a year, that is done to a point where the exercises are leading them to feel fatigued. Like they take them to this thing called the shake point. Make sure they're shaking. Do that and do it 3 times a week and for a long enough period of time. So they're kind of checking off these things that we think are important for strengthening. And then what they found is, in terms of inter-recti distance, it varied at the end of the program. Some it increased, some it decreased, some it just stayed the same. Also, what they found is for all of the participants, distortion, when they measured it with the ultrasound, distortion decreased. So there seems to be another shift, we sort of went down the tension.
Can you explain distortion real quick for people
Yeah,
that don't know what distortion is?
absolutely. So distortion is what researchers tend to use as a term to describe what happens, what they see in the linea alba, when the linea alba is not a straight line between the two rectus abdominis muscles. So when we see that the linea alba is straight, then we can say that there is some tension through the system. When we see that there's some wiggly lines in that linea alba, it indicates that there's slack in the that structure. So distortion is a measure of kind of they take a look at
the squiggle. It's a measure of the squiggle.
The area underneath the squiggle, and they do it like they divide one thing by another, and they come up with this number. So they call it the distortion index. And then we as practitioners and who are not in research, what we can say or what we can use that for is just kind of understanding the status of the connective tissue, and in terms of tension, the ability to generate tension. So we have a way to use distortion, but not by calling it distortion. Clinically, we can just look for things like tension versus slack, doming. These are kind of other factors that we're looking for.
Depth might be another. Yeah.
Depth is another one. Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you basically, you said, so Diane was referencing that the distortion with all this stuff had gotten less, so it was better?
It was better. Exactly. Okay. So in their
that seems good, right?
Right. Well, we would think so, and that's kind of what I'm assuming they will publish, and what they how they analyze it. They'll, whatever they say, we'll just take it and we'll see where they want to go with that. But it kind of just builds from their previous study where they just kind of mention tension. So this was a study done in 2016 where they showed that during an automatic curl up, when someone just lifts their head up off the floor or the mat without engaging their TA or pelvic floor, that the rectus abdominis comes together. There's a narrowing effect. When there's a pre-activation through the TA, then there's less narrowing, so that there's less distortion, and hence there's more tension. So these are things that sort of stemmed from that study. And it's really interesting that while these topics and um, these ideas are so relevant clinically, I find in clinical practice, most people understand tension is important. We're not just looking at the interrecti distance.
Yep.
And while that seems to be so widely prevalent amongst clinicians, that is not at all being studied enough. It just seems to be a couple of researchers talking about that. So the body of evidence we have still tends to focus on reduction of interrecti distance.
And that's the part that I think, so much of this stuff distills, social media, common knowledge sorts of things, that gap is still very much a focus. And, thinking back to, back when I was pregnant with my oldest, and he's almost 13 now, like that very much was what we were looking at. And that's kind of what we talked about. You pull the sides together and that, teaches it how to work. And now we know in the context of this information with tensioning, no, that was never going to work by just hauling the two sides together. But I feel like the research, it like evolved to some degree, because at first we're like, okay, we don't like the gap, don't do this. And then it was like, all right, well, do TA. And then they're like, oh no, don't do TA because it'll open the gap. And then, but why is it like it's still this stupid gap thing? And which drives me nuts, because here's the thing. I mean, like thank you for, Anthony Lowe for, being like, dude, you're no problem here. You're just weak. Not a big deal. But at the same time, like mine is a party trick now. I literally can like manipulate it because it's a
Right.
coordination thing for me.
Right.
I can make it change. I can control the tension. Like it's a party trick for me. But for a lot of people, I think having that gap means so much more aesthetically, good grief. And then also like not feeling at home in your body. Like, I mean, we'll talk about this in a second, like postpartum, it's like an alien has exited your body and there's a waterbed, and it's so very strange. But it kills me that years later, we're still coming back to that we can't just let that piece go. What are your thoughts on that?
I find it to be a very sad situation, because I feel like where the research is going, where I want the research to go, we're just not there yet. And that's why I find it sad, because we tend to see these things clinically. Many of us have already come to these conclusions where we know that it's not all about the gap size.
Yeah.
And it's not even about gap tension necessarily. We have to take a step further back and look at abdominal wall.
Yes.
And once we do that, we're kind of led in the right direction of what we can do to help someone. Once we start getting so microscopic and start looking at the linea alba and which muscles do this to it and which muscles do that to it, we kind of get derailed, because it gets very confusing when you hear from 5 years ago, you should do TA exercises because they're deep. It's a deep core muscle, and we want to reestablish the deep core connection into the body. So include that with everything. And then we hear in the past year, well, if you do TA exercises, it actually tends to widen the linea alba. But we also know that it tends to draw the abdominal wall in, and that's usually what people want. So now they're kind of stuck here between, yes, I want to have an improvement in where my abdomen is resting, but I don't want to widen my linea alba. So now we've kind of created a barrier there.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the same thing happened with rectus abdominis, where it was pretty much shunned upon to do any kind of rectus abdominis exercises, especially head lifts or sit-ups, especially in maybe the past 10 years. And yet in the past year-ish, the studies, these are basic studies, but they needed to be done so we can have something there to kind of back up what we're saying, that when you use the rectus abdominis muscle, it tends to narrow the linea alba, not widen it. And
Yeah.
so now we've got people worried about rectus abdominis on one hand because they've heard that it strains the tissue, the linea alba, too much and it will cause harm.
Right.
And now there are contradictory findings in the research that it narrows the linea alba. So, okay, we've created another roadblock there. And now we can go down this road. There are many roadblocks
Yeah.
actually being created because of the conflicting and contradictory research findings and approaches that are really occurring now, but haven't yet overtaken the previous paradigm, which
Yeah.
is we don't want to do anything that creates an increase in linea alba width or an increase in strain to the linea alba.
Yeah. Which could totally be a deer in headlights moment for a
Yeah.
clinician, unless you were like, all right, y'all, you got to catch up with us because we're moving forward.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
just thinking about, the average physio does not have ultrasound imaging. I'm
Yes.
lucky enough to have it. And I remember like early on being taught, oh, when you feel the muscle pop out into your fingers,
Right.
that's TA. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's internal obliques. So the average person and average clinician may not actually get an accurate TA isolating contraction anyway. And guess what? It may not actually matter.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh, exactly. And so there's 2 points there. Yes, a lot of clinicians don't have an ultrasound, and
Yeah.
some people it's not even allowed in there because of
Right.
what's considered within their scope. And that's
Right.
where I'm at, where in my
Thanks,
practice
Canada.
I know there's so many of us that's what we want is to implement real-time ultrasound.
Yeah.
We're not allowed right now. There are some initiatives being done to help
Which is
us.
crazy. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
It is. No, it absolutely is, and it's very frustrating because in some ways you feel like you're falling behind because you can't, there are a lot of people here in Canada that want to provide better education, that want to participate in
Yeah.
these kinds of initiatives, and we just don't have the credibility when we don't have as much, uh, uh, re ultrasound access here. So,
Yeah.
in any case, there's that. But then regarding the frustration amongst clinicians, the deer in headlight situation, and what that leads to from the patient perspective. It's no surprise, but it's worth mentioning that in a qualitative study done in 2019, where they were interviewing people that have diastasis, one of the four sort of topics or categories of information that they grouped from that they collected this information and they grouped it out. One of the groups of information was that they felt frustrated regarding the lack of knowledge from their providers
Yeah.
regarding diastasis. So it's absolutely true in what you're saying. It's also something that's been echoed in research on multiple occasions. And I get it because
Yeah.
you and I are having this conversation for that exact reason.
Yeah.
There's so much happening right now. TA exercises widen, RA exercises close, narrow the gap. So we're turning things around, we're flipping them around, and it's almost like the world isn't ready in some ways to
Yeah.
hear it because there's just so much fear around anything related to diastasis.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's not a great place to be if you are a person that has diastasis, and it's not but it is a better place to be if you're a professional and you're looking for information on how to update yourself because there are people
Yeah.
out there with courses
Yeah.
that have updated
Exactly.
knowledge. So
Exactly.
I feel like
No.
there isn't an excuse anymore. Like the information is there. There are people that have done that work for you. And so the more of us that have that behind us, the
Mhm.
more we can just kind of disseminate all of that fear.
Well, and I think also too that we've got more experience kind of pushing that needle more. Like I have
Right.
a client that I'm working with right now. She just had her second C-section. She's an avid CrossFit athlete, and we started. I saw her after first, saw her at 4 weeks postpartum, this second round, and I think below the umbilicus, it was decent. It was like a good three finger below, and actually a little less above. And we got right in, got everything kind of just coordination first, breath. She's 12 weeks now, and it's just steadily been improving. She's doing, back to basic gymnastics. We're just going back to fundamentals. And I don't know that I would have pushed that hard even a couple years ago.
Mhm.
But the fact that we're just being very intentional about, okay, let's get the coordination down first. Let's get our basic stuff in. Then let's go back to our fundamentals of bar work and gymnastics and that kind of stuff and just slowly keep building. And she's very consistent. And I mean, we're down now to maybe half a finger below and maybe half a finger above. I mean, but to be able to watch that and allow her to kind of progress in a really methodical way, I don't know that if I would have even had let her start doing that
Yeah.
even just a couple years ago. And I think that's the other thing too. Like while we're waiting for this research to come out, like we also have to be comfortable in creating individual programs and guided by what our client brings back to us and helping kind of create that collaborative relationship that they know what they can and can't push and what the guide wires are and that kind of stuff. Because I think that's going to go back for us to ask the researchers like, hey, this is what we noticed, help us understand why it worked in this person and maybe not in somebody else. So
Yes, that's the key right
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yes.
So for you, we're going to switch gears for a second. You're a new mom.
Yes.
How long have you been a mom now? How many months in are we now?
She's turning 9 months.
That was fast.
Yeah, next week she's turning 9 months.
Oh
So
my
yeah.
goodness. I was going to say not too many bags. You look pretty good.
Oh, thank
Not too exhausted.
Thank you. Yes, we have overcome the horrible sleep issues from before. So I'm starting to catch up.
That is hard. My first was that way. Thank God my second was not. But yeah, the struggle is real. For you, like what were the things that sort of surprised you most physically about your experience in pregnancy and postpartum?
Physically, during pregnancy, I I knew I was weak going into pregnancy. I
Mhm.
was not in a strong body, which is what I really wanted to have
Mm,
in pregnancy. And during that time, there was also immense stress through a move that we had to do in my second trimester. And, we were moving not just to 2 blocks away, it was 5 hours away. So driving back and forth multiple times a week,
yeah,
staying at other people's houses and all of that, and just putting on offers on houses and then
that's a
not
lot.
getting them, and, like, it was the worst. But there was a lot of stress, and I ended up having a lot of pain, pelvic
Mm.
girdle pain, and I also had a lot of, swelling. Oh my gosh, I had vulvar varicose veins, like,
Oh, ouch.
most severe case I've ever seen,
Of
and
course, right?
what's that?
I said, of course, we always get the bad stuff,
It's the
right?
most severe, I know, and that was probably the worst of all of it.
Oh,
So it was, you handled it, you made your way through pregnancy, and thankfully, my concern was they wouldn't go away afterwards. They all was
mm,
everything resolved.
good.
No pain, no swelling, we're good. So that was a surprise. I knew I was gonna have some physical pain. That's what I thought I would have because I felt very weak in my body beforehand.
Mm,
So I felt like I was gonna have that. Postpartum, the surprise for me is how quickly my body just sort of uh, kind of came back. And my abdomen, while I was gonna end up with a lot of stretch marks, loose
mhm.
skin, just based on what my mom has. And I feel like I have a very similar I don't know, body. And I thought I was gonna have that. Mind you, she had 2 kids in a short period of time versus I've only had 1, but my abdomen kind of recoiled right back in, and I
Thank you,
was
genetics.
thank you really, and I can tell you, so there's a two-part here because I was surprised that it happened, because I was expecting something different based on
Mhm.
my genetics, but I was surprised that it happened because I also was not doing anything despite,
Mm,
I was not a good patient. I will be absolutely upfront about that. I was an awful patient. And a small backstory behind that is in third trimester, there was just a launch of a small thing called Tummy Tuck Rehab. So Tummy Tuck Rehab was all launched like probably 3 days before I went into labor.
So
And
really, that was your first child.
that was the first child. Yes. And so my immediate postpartum experience was based on just relaxing, trying to not be working. And that's what I did is I just kind of
Good for
took the
you.
time and just rested and just
Good.
enjoyed my baby. And so, yes, my abdomen kind of went back in, and I was very surprised because I didn't do anything, despite having the full intention, like, I'm going to document this, I'm going to do these things, breathing and pelvic floor and TA, and I'm going to have video set up. Oh my gosh, I didn't do anything.
No, and I'm
My
glad you
body,
said that.
yeah,
I'm
and my
glad you
body,
said that for a couple of reasons. One, I'm so glad I didn't have kids in the social media era because that pressure to document it and make your personal experience and process it at the same time as you're navigating it professionally. I don't know how people do that. I wish they didn't feel like they have to, but like, nope, not like that's hard. And the first time you're a mom, like you're drinking from the fire hose
yes,
for a really long time.
yes.
So I'm glad that you were just like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I'm really proud of
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and because that's the thing, some people will do it and
I
not
know.
really end up with great results or where they want it to be, and some people won't do it.
Yeah.
And they will end up in a place where they don't want to be, and some people won't do it, and they'll end up in a place where they're fine. So
Yeah.
we don't have enough information there on, like you were asking, what is it about those that do it and
Thank you.
have the results that they wanted? What is it? What are the characteristics behind that individual, whether it's genetic
Yep.
or environmental? What's going on there?
Yep.
Genetics, I think it's going to come down to genetics. It's probably one of the biggest factors, but
Mhm.
we will have to continue to wait and see.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad you say that too, because again, I think, I often joke that there's this portal that you walk through once you deliver, that you take information in a completely different way. And I think pre-pregnancy and in pregnancy, you're like, oh, well, that's not going to be me. I can control everything. And back to that whole thing of you've given up control, you've relinquished it. Like there's
Yeah.
some things that we know enough about that we can navigate and have a degree of control. And there's other things that we just don't. And the sooner I think we come to peace with that, then, you're not sitting in postpartum with unmet expectations that
Yeah.
probably weren't going to be met
Yeah,
anyway.
you're adding so much to your plate just mentally by thinking that you should be doing this, you have to be doing this.
There's enough things
It's
we have to deal with.
unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, definitely. Well, good. I'm glad you learned that early because it definitely took some of us a little bit longer.
yeah, yeah. For me, it was I had no choice. Like I
Yeah.
was exhausted. Um, I remember recording one of the lectures for our tummy tuck course for
Mhm.
professionals, and I was literally having what I thought real legit contractions because I was recording it at night and it was the end of a stressful, and I was just like, please baby, don't come right now. And I was just trying to finish the lecture because I'm like, I cannot push this till postpartum. This project has to be done before my baby comes out.
So if you purchase the Tummy Tuck Rehab course, look for Munira having contractions.
You
See
won't
if
see
you can
it. I
spot
do it
it.
really well.
Tag her on Instagram. Oh my goodness. All right.
Lisa, who was my partner, she was like, I cannot believe you were doing this when you were pregnant.
And
Like
and
this
and
is stressful regardless. But
full kudos to Lisa for, she has 2 kids and being able to navigate that and keeping you kind of even keeled and through it
she's
and
been
not being like, "What
absolutely
are you doing?"
she is. Yeah,
I
yeah,
love her.
absolutely.
She's the
I love
she's the
Lisa.
best. Oh my goodness. All right. At the end of every episode, we ask everybody a couple of different questions. The first one is usually what book you're reading or what podcast you're listening to. I'm guessing you don't have time for that right now. So,
Oh, well actually
oh,
I listen to books a lot more. I don't
cool. What are you
I
listening to?
cannot sit there and read. So I right now on my computer screen, I do have multiple research studies open. So I'm
Oh, cool.
simultaneously reading research and stuff like that. But in terms of what I'm listening to, I tend to go more towards personal development, business development,
Okay.
entrepreneurial marketing. I love all that stuff.
Cool.
So what am I listening to right now? Let me just see here. I just finished one book and then I'm on to the next already. There was a book called The Slight Edge that I just
Okay.
finished. It's really good.
Okay.
It sort of builds on the principles that I think his name was James Clear. I think he was on your podcast.
Mhm.
from Atomic Habits, it builds on that in terms of the small things that you do every day make a big difference in the long run. So it's that taking advantage of that compounding effect. So
Yep.
I think they were applying it more to business, but you can apply it to every aspect of your life and just using whatever you have 60 minutes to use within an hour. And so like, what do you do in the 60 minutes?
I find that there's so many business books that actually, and James Clear's was one of them that I think he wrote it before he had kids. I was like, dude, you really just wrote a parenting book. You didn't know that when you wrote it, but when he was on the podcast last year, he had just had his second, and I was like, dude, it was a parenting book. Building habits, parenting.
Yes.
All
And
right,
like,
favorite. Go ahead.
that's fine. No, that's it.
Favorite activity since becoming a mom.
It
It doesn't have to be about your daughter.
It is though. It absolutely will
Okay.
be. There's no other, that it is the best thing in my life, being a mother. And the most favorite activity is basically doing anything with her, but I love taking her, her most favorite place is the mall. So
Yeah.
I take her to the mall and then we'll just sit there and I'll take her out of her stroller and she just has the biggest smile on her face and she looks around and like smiles at everybody.
That's
And
awesome.
she's like, loves watching people, but she loves to like grab them in with her smile. So I just love that.
Awesome. And it's never a bad thing when people are like, you have such a cute baby. Like, oh, thank you.
Yes.
I made that.
Yeah. It's all me.
All right. With your 9 months of experience, one piece of advice for new moms.
It would be probably to try to get a support network. Try to if you don't have friends right now that have kids, see if you can join programs in your city, town, community, neighborhood with that are mom and baby groups, because being able to connect with other moms of babies with the same age, it is so invaluable to just share experiences, to feel like you're not alone, to vent, but also to then marvel in the miracle that's there in front of us. And just having those people is so important. And I'm very fortunate to have some people in my life.
I would 100% agree. And those people are going to be your friends for life, by the way. So that's super cool.
It's beautiful.
All right. Quick professional question here. Who's somebody in pregnancy, postpartum, or even diastasis space? Like, who should we be looking at? Who should we be paying attention to right now?
Well,
who are you fangirling over?
I fangirl Grania Donnelly.
Oh, well, we all do.
Yeah, all the time.
We all do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe of what she does and how she's able to accomplish so much. But and everything that she touches and works on is just pure gold. So.
I think we should just rename the podcast that we're Grania's fan club and Emma's and just all of that. So Grania, guess what? We're renaming the podcast.
Absolutely.
Love you. Yeah, she's been on.
Well deserved.
She was actually, so Grania was our first episode on the podcast. And then she and Emma were on last year. I guess, no, they were on in January. So anytime, any excuse I have to just make up to talk to them, I kind of do. So, but it's sort of selfish. So we can just fangirl together.
We will. Yeah.
All right. And then last one here. What does it mean to you to be an active mom in postpartum?
What does it mean to me? To me, being active is, how do I say this? I'm at a point right now where I'm integrating activity, movement, and fitness into my life, but differently.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to be active? To me, it means health. It also means to be whole, because I feel like as I get older, I had Aria at 39, I'm 40. And so I feel like strengthening, fitness, cardio, these are things that are so important, especially as we get older, to combat the effects of hormonal changes, muscle loss, and all of that. But also it's the weirdest thing when you wanted to do all of that and now you have no time.
Yes.
So it's again taking use of these concepts from Slight Edge, from the Atomic Habits book, and incorporating it into my life through small little things.
Perfect.
And that's what I'm doing right now. But what it means to be, it's part of what I envision me to be as a whole person, where health is one aspect of that, physical health.
I love that. And the season that you're in, that's exactly just these tiny little movement snacks. I love that. I
Yes,
love that.
yes. So as an example, we have a long corridor upstairs.
Mhm.
So I have to bring her from the staircase down the hall all the way to the end to put her in her bed
Mhm.
for a nap. And so I'm holding her and I'm doing walking lunges all the way there.
Love
And
it.
I do it on the way back. So I'm incorporating it that way. I've got weights right set up at the door. So when she's not there, I'm doing it with weights.
Make it easy. I love it. And again, like I think that there's so much to be said with all the knowledge that you have. We still have to put it into practice, and finding these small, tiny little things done is better than perfect. Love it.
Yeah, I do go to the gym, but it's certainly not as frequent as I want.
Someday, someday.
Exactly. Yeah.
You've got a lot of
I'll
time.
take what I can get.
Exactly. All right. If you want to know more about Munira and her courses, she's got some information online, and her Instagram is Munira Hudani PT. The two courses she's got Diastasis Recti for professionals and also Tummy Tuck Rehab. Munira, thank you so very much for being on. I'm glad we finally pulled this together and got it done.
It was wonderful.
And thanks so much for educating so many people and clinicians about diastasis.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Did you enjoy the podcast? If so, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and tell a friend to do the same. Are you a postpartum mom or postpartum pro wanting to know more about getting back to running after baby? Check out all my free goodies on carriepagliano.com. This podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests to the show. The content should not be taken as medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Always consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.